Right, good evening everybody. Thanks for coming along. Something a bit different tonight. As most of you know, with another hat, I do voluntary work up at the Fleet Air Arm Museum up at Yeovilton once a week, talking to people about the Fleet Air Arm and doing a few bits and pieces up there. So this is a talk that we have done there for the public, slightly modified, and it's all about the aircraft carrier. Why do we talk about the aircraft? Why don't we talk about destroyers or submarines or frigates or anything like that? We talk about the aircraft carrier because it was the one ship in the 20th century that completely revolutionised naval warfare. It changed completely after centuries of tactics being exactly the same. And I'm going to concentrate particularly on the development of the carrier in the Navy. The reason why it changed so much is that up until probably World War II, the concept of fighting at sea was you get your team alongside the enemy's team and then you try and blow 7 bills of shit out of each other, you know. But this completely revolutionised it. So what is an aircraft carrier? Well, there's an aerial photograph of Naval Air Station Yeovilton. Museum's over there in the top right-hand corner. And what you've got to do is to take typical any airport. When I'm talking to children, I always say, tell me 5 things that you find at an airport. And you get a long list of everything. You've got to take all of that, all the support services, somewhere for the people to eat, drink, and phone home, and put it all in something like that, which is a steel box about 800 feet long. So you need everything that you've got on a runway. Well, just to take you back to that photograph, the main runway there, runway 0927, is 2.2 kilometres long. And the other one going across the picture is 1.4 kilometres. And that was laid out in 1940. In miles? Yeah, when you try talking to 11-year-olds, and what's a mile, mister? Yeah, so, yeah, okay. You do the maths. It's quite large, and there's a lovely little story attached to this. Where that airfield is situated is at sea level. It's actually at sea level, even though you're in the middle of Somerset. If you look at the geology around that site, all the villages are actually up high because it's a bit of a floodplain. And they discovered that when they were doing the A303 new road recently. As they dug down, when they came back to the site in the morning, they found that all the holes they dug had filled up with water. So to the point where they had to put out life rings around it. And there was a story in the local paper from the 1940s that said Navy to bring seaplanes to Somerset, because they thought they were going to flood it, and as we were flying seaplanes then, bring it in. But no, it was concreted over. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. It's Yeovilton. This is Yeovilton. This is the village of Yeovilton. That is Ilchester in the distance. The rest of it is all, and it gets bigger and bigger. So you want to put all of that into a steel box. Now, currently, here's a nice photograph. Four aircraft carriers this was taken some years ago. There's two American, a Spanish one near us, and one of our old aircraft carriers that's long gone on the far side. Currently, there are 15 nations in the world operating aircraft carriers. Obviously, America has got the lion's share. France, Spain, Italy, China, Russia, India, Thailand, Turkey, Brazil, Egypt, South Korea, and last but by no means least, Iran has got an aircraft carrier. It's not what we would think of an aircraft carrier, it's a converted container ship, but it's got the ability to launch a full-sized drone from it. When I say a full-sized drone, I mean a drone the size of an aircraft. So why did the Navy, who've been sailing around for centuries, get involved with aeroplanes after the Wright brothers in 1903? And you've got to go all the way back to that time to actually find a few answers. So this is a picture of the Navy, or one of the fleets of the Navy at about 1900. And the defence of the sort of political thinking of the day was that we needed a navy that was twice the size of any other navy in the world. Now that was quite some undertaking. So we were spending oodles of money on defence. We had probably something approaching 500,000 men in the navy alone. And the idea was that if we had something going wrong in the Far East, we might have to fight a war out there, at the same time fighting one in Europe. We had an empire to police, and that's what the job was. The Industrial Revolution had taken, we'd gone in 100 years, we'd gone from cannonballs at Trafalgar to 15-inch guns with shells. The big problem we had that we couldn't see what we were bloody firing at. Because the only sensor that we had to detect the enemy was the Mark I eyeball. And that was it. That was all we had. So obviously, simple thinking, the higher you are, the further you can see. And there were some very interesting experiments. Buffalo Bill Cody, William Cody, who was Buffalo Bill, had a Wild West show. He was also very, very interested in aviation. He came over here in the late 1890s and said, well, I've got man-lifting kites. Why don't you tow one of these behind a destroyer? And sure enough, I've got a picture of it here, but they were towing man-lifting kites with a sailor in it up to about 50, 60 feet or higher with a pair of binoculars. Any volunteers? So there you go. Yeah, but the Navy were doing it in 1900. There were other ideas. How are we going to get these aircraft to sea? When we did have aircraft, they put them on barges and towed them behind destroyers. There is only one barge, one of those barges left in existence, and it's in our cold storage up at the museum. It was found some years ago, buried in the mud of the River Thames. Anyway, there was a group of people got together in the Navy when the Wright brothers came over here, and they tried to sell the Admiralty some aeroplanes. So the Navy appointed somebody to have a look at this aeroplane thing. You know, it could be interesting. So it slowly started to evolve. Now, the first person to actually take off from a ship anywhere in the world was an American, wouldn't you know? A chap called Ely in 1910. But one thing wrong, the ship was at anchor, stationary. So we decided to go one better. So this is 1912. This is HMS Africa. and it was moored at Sheerness on the Thames, and the runway, as such, was just some planks of wood bolted on top of the gun barrels. And a man called Charles Sampson decided that, yeah, okay, I'm a young blood, I'll fly this. So they're anchored at Sheerness on the mouth of the Thames. Off he goes. Yeah, we've done it, stationary. So the Navy then decided to go one better. There was a fleet review in Weymouth Bay in the May of 1912. They took HMS Hibernia to sea, and you can see the bow wave of the ship there, and we did it from a ship underway. Now, the top speed of this aircraft, this is a short S-27, is only 48 miles an hour. Now, if you've got your ship and you're steaming along at 20 knots, 20 miles an hour, into a 10-knot wind, where you've got 30 knots of wind over the deck, they must have been hanging on to it before he let it go. Because it's just a big kite. You know, that's all it is. But that was the start. That was the start of the idea that we could actually get somebody at sea in a plane up and having a look. Then, of course, we had World War I, and we see a rapid development of aircraft. So the Navy then decided, okay, we're going to need some aircraft carrying ships. We haven't got any. So what they did is they requisitioned 3 cross-channel ferries. This is one of them, HMS Engadine, bolted on some canvas walls at the back and put 4 seaplanes on it. This is a short 184. That aircraft was designed to carry a torpedo. It's got a water-cooled engine, V12 water-cooled engine. The radiator for that is right in front of the pilot. So the pilot's forward view is atrocious. It's the only aircraft that was at the Battle of Jutland. And we've got it in the museum, or what remains of it. But the idea was coming that actually we've got to get these aircraft to sea. And we were flying float planes like that. The short 184, typical of its day, along with a few from the Sopwith stable. And it was quite successful. There's legion of stories. Now, to carry a torpedo on that and a great big water-cooled engine with a 50-gallon fuel tank, you need a lot of lift. The only way they could get the lift in those days was wing. The wingspan of that aircraft was 63 feet. That's the width of our hangar. You know, we've got it in a display case. We haven't got the wing now. But we said, well, the wing was as wide as this hangar, and it's huge. And it folded in half.
Did the RFA run a vessel for the Engadine many years later?
Yeah. Helicopter training ship. It's a name that has come down through the ages as a vessel associated with aviation.
I remember when I worked in the shipyard, the Engadine was one that came up regularly in
Yeah,
conversation.
I'm sure it would do.
A lot of the guys worked on it.
Yeah.
But not that one, it would have been the later one.
Not that one. So they decided that they needed something a bit better because these seaplanes were quite slow, they were lumbering, it took a long time to get one in the water because what you had to do is you had to stop the ship. You had to stop the ship, crane the plane into the water, off the pilot would go, do his reconnaissance, whatever, and then you'd have to stop the ship again to recover it, assuming that he found his way back to the ship. So that was the deal. Now, captains of ships do not like to stop in infested waters. I say shark infested, but at the same time as aircraft were being developed, of course, we've got the submarine coming along as well. So we wanted to go a little bit better. So this is HMS Furious. Now, HMS Furious was probably the last of the big gun cruisers. That gun on the back is got an 18-inch barrel, 18-inch bore. Now that was going to fire a, you know, that was going to spoil somebody's day. Originally, they were going to put one on the back, one on the front, and it was designated as a big gun cruiser, and it was designed to go and bomb, shell a navy, an enemy country. So the Admiralty said, well, actually, we don't need this now. So they gave it back to the dockyard, and they converted the front end to it. They took the gun off, and they built on a proper fixed flying, they called it the flying off deck. They didn't call it a flight deck, it was a flying off deck. And there was a little lift at the back just in front of the bridge, which allowed them to have they carried about 10 dozen small aircraft. Now, Furious went on to have quite an illustrious career. That's what she would have looked like in profile. Great big gun on the back, which was never fired in anger, as far as we know, but about 10 aircraft on there. So that was converted in 1916, and then in 1917, one of the bright young pilots, a chap called Dunning, was in charge of a squadron on the Firth of Forth, and he said, well, if we can fly off in these slow planes, why can't we land? So, and this is quite a famous photograph. He went out to sea one day, and he flew alongside the ship and side slipped on. So they wound the ship up to about 25 knots, and then he was going to attempt to land back on the deck. And if you notice under the wings there are some strops hanging down, so he got all his mates out on there to help him pull it down. Don't all volunteer at once. So that was Dunning. Now he was so good, he was so chuffed with that he did it again the following day, and he thought, yeah, we've got an idea here. We can work on this. The third time he tried it, unfortunately, his engine cut out, and he disappeared over the front, and he was lost at sea. But his body was recovered, and his watch was recovered, and we have his watch in the museum, and it was 3:45 in the afternoon that it happened. So that was, but the seeds were being sown in ship design here, and Furious went on to have a few other modifications. So the first thing they did was say, well, if we can put a flying off deck on the front, let's put a flying on deck at the back. So they whipped off the other gun, and then they put a flying on deck. And there is a picture somewhere of an aerial view of it, and there's a little sort of passageway either side of the superstructure where they can wheel the planes from the front to the back. Slight problem when they were doing trials with this, and pilots said, no way, Jose, are we going to land on this thing. You've got a great big steam boiler situated about here, chucking out all sorts of hot, nasty, obnoxious gases out the top. Remember, we're burning coal or just onto oil by this time, and it is very hot. Heat in air causes a lot of turbulence. So as the pilots were approaching the rear, they were bound. Remember, these little planes only weighed about 1.5 tons. They weren't very heavy. So that was abandoned, and we'll see what happened to Furious a bit later on. But the thoughts were starting to turn to, actually what we need is a proper deck. Let's just cut the top off the ship and put a deck on it. This is HMS Argus, This was right at the end of World War I. It's actually was being built as a liner for an Italian shipping company. The Admiralty requisitioned it, like you do, and said, no, we're going to turn that into an aircraft carrier. HMS Argus, it was nicknamed HMS Flatiron because it's probably the ugliest ship the Navy have ever built. She appeared in 1918, a bit too late to take part in World War I. Wouldn't have won any beauty contest, that's for sure. But she was the first true floating airfield. Now, this is a later picture of her, and there is an aircraft about to land on there. Note the number of people wandering about the flight deck. You know, health and safety hadn't quite sort of got its act together then. But what is interesting to note, especially these days, at the rear we've got a small destroyer, and they's called the plane guard, and that's a feature of operations. You've always got a ship escorting you in case somebody goes into the drink. But that was Argus, that was the first thing, and of course World War I finished, and then, oh, let's go and build ourselves some proper aircraft carriers. Get the idea. So HMS Eagle was a next one, converted battleship, and then Hermes, which appeared in somewhere, I've got endless dates. Hermes appeared in 1923, and she was the first keel-up aircraft carrier. That she was actually designed as an aircraft carrier. Now, there's a little problem here. The Navy had a problem. In 1918, the Lords and Masters in London said, we don't need a Royal Naval Air Service. We don't need the Royal Flying Corps for the Army. We're going to merge them together, and we're going to have a Royal Air Force. So on All Fool's Day, April the 1st, was it a Thursday, was it?
Yeah. Well, no, it was a Monday, but it didn't get going until Thursday.
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah. There's leisure stories. And that has always been a little bit of rivalry between the Navy and the Air Force, that the oldest flying arm is the Navy. The Navy fleet, the Fleet Air Arm is older than the Royal Air Force. It did cause some problems because the Admiralty retained control of the ship design. That's fine, the Admiralty can build ships. The Air Force controlled aircraft design. So throughout the interwar periods, the Navy suffered from lack of decent aeroplanes because they were all Air Ministry requirements. And the top of the list was, oh, we've got grass runways. You know, we want this aircraft, that aircraft. Or you can have those for sea. Administratively, it was a nightmare. Because if you were a young man and you wanted to fly, you joined the Air Force. Part of your training was to fly on one of these, fly off the deck. So when you were at an airbase, you were pilot officer blogs in your light grey uniform, and you got paid as a pilot officer in the Royal Air Force. If you got a posting to one of these, you became sub-lieutenant blogs, RN, changed your uniform and got paid a different rate of pay. Now, think of the admin that must have involved. Anyway, that's how the situation was. But by 1924, it was all getting a bit out of hand. So the Air Force decided to have a proper air arm dedicated to the fleet. And that's where we see the first time the term Fleet Air Arm used. It's actually an Air Force term and became the Fleet Air Arm of the Royal Air Force. So that's the Furious, meanwhile, went on to have the rest of her superstructure lopped off and turned into an aircraft. a full-blown carrier. And amazingly, Furious survived right up until 1948. She carried on and she wasn't scrapped until 1948. To launch, you had to use the full deck. As aircraft got heavier throughout the 20s and 30s, they then started to think about, if we're going to land on this deck, we're going to need something to slow them up. And we'll see that a bit later on. But there were some other interesting ideas. This is a bit of old film that this is submarine M2. Check out the accents.
Already in hangar. We are here. I want you to search for shipping in this direction. And
The catapult is powered by compressed air. Bit different, isn't it? Now, that film was taken on the 28th of May 1931. That's from Movie Tone News. The submarine, unfortunately, was lost in the January of 1932. She went down off Portland with all hands. The flight deck, the hangar doors at the front had failed to close, and the seals didn't mate. And as she dived, the sea just came in. So she just carried on going down. There's a couple of videos on YouTube. You can see divers have gone down to have a look at it. But they decided what happened. So that's just a bit of a, the only country that actually did that seriously was Japan. A seaplane carrying on ships. But I don't know.
Submarines with,
yeah, they might. I mean, I know we had another submarine with a great big gun on it. But the idea was to get an aeroplane on every ship. But that wasn't going to happen just yet. So we started building aircraft carriers. 1930s, threat of another war. This is HMS Ark Royal. It's got an 800-foot deck. This is Ark Royal. She went into the Second World War. Now, at the rear of the flight deck, you will see over here what looks like a swordfish. Look at the size of the aircraft to the size of the flight deck. It's tiny. It's light. When we look at other aircraft carriers that we're using in the 70s with similar lengths of decks, we compare to the size of the aircraft. Outbreak of World War II, we had 7 operational aircraft carriers, and then we said, and in 1937 there was a report. In March 1939, the Admiralty got back control of its aeroplanes. Unfortunately, we were left with aeroplanes like the Swordfish, which went on to give a really remarkable account of itself in World War II. Unfortunately, it was designed to an air ministry requirement, but it's the iconic aircraft, and there's still a couple of them flying today at Yeovilton. So we go into World War II, and the first thing that happens is we lose Courageous, then we lose Glorious, which was the sister ship to the Furious. And then in fairly short order after that, we lose the Ark Royal, the Ark Royal, Hermes and Eagle. So what's happening? Why are we losing these aircraft carriers? Aircraft carriers, brilliant. Got aircraft at sea. What they are is a lovely, juicy target. Submarines love them, and they could go in and sink them. But Eagle, in 1942, was the last aircraft carrier sunk as far as the Royal Navy is concerned. It wasn't all doom and gloom, because the country embarked on a massive building programme, and the Audacious class, and we started to build carriers, all different shapes and sizes. We also started to get some more aircraft. We got the American Lend-Lease aircraft. Now, we had the Grumman Wildcat, which became the Martlet, the Grumman Avenger, the Grumman Hellcat, and the Chanceforte Corsair. Now, the American Navy had not done what we did. They had actually taken charge of their aircraft during interwar years. They had designed aircraft specifically to fly off carriers. And these aircraft they gave us on Lend-Lease were brilliant. They were strong, robust, they could take punishment, they were fast, they were a bit heavy. And we also had our own. We had the Barracuda coming along, the Fulmar and the Skua, all metal-bodied aircraft. So these carriers were flying decent aircraft, and they went on to give a good account of themselves. One area we needed air cover was the North Atlantic. And there was a few odd things done. First photograph at the top was a MAC ship. And MAC stands for Merchant Aircraft Carrier. So it's basically a merchant ship that's got a pumpable cargo. So if you're carrying sand, cement, grain, oil, anything that can be pumped, you can lose the superstructure because you don't need derricks. So it just cut it off, stick a flight deck on it, stick a little island on the front, and you can put about 10 dozen aircraft on there. And they were brilliant for the convoy, because it gives you it gave the convoy escort commanders another tool. He didn't just need a frigate with depth charges. He could launch one of these. German submarines had to surface once every 24 hours to recharge their battery. If they were sat on the surface, they're vulnerable. And we could hear what was going, we could listen to them. The other one, the escort carrier, these were built out of what the Americans called Liberty ships. They were very, very quick, sort of bolted together ships, Woolworth ships, and they also gave a good account of themselves. So by the end of World War II, we had 52 aircraft carriers. We had 52 aircraft carriers in the Royal Navy. That was the end of the war.
It's funny you should mention the Liberty ships, because they had a series of Liberty ships with the T2s, which were the tankers.
Yeah.
And there were still some of them in use when I was an apprentice in the shipyard.
I can believe
I
it.
worked on a few of them.
Yeah.
Incredible things.
Yeah.
You know,
But they were built, I think
together.
one of the claims the Americans had, they could build one of these in a week.
It was designed for one trip, basically.
Yeah, they were like, you know, the Woolworths
Yeah.
version of the
I
ship.
remember the T2s with affection.
But something happened while with all these aircraft carriers. November the 11th, 1940, there was an attack by the Fleet Air Arm on Taranto in southern Italy. That was the base of the Italian Navy. And basically 2 aircraft carriers with swordfish on board, torpedoes, went in and sunk a lot of the Italian Navy, did a lot of damage while they were at anchor. They had to modify the torpedoes slightly so they could run a bit shallower, but Admiral Cunningham, who was in charge of the Mediterranean Fleet at the time, said it was the coming of age of the Fleet Air Arm. So this was the, battleships couldn't have done this, but we snuck in, and there was only 1 or 2 aircraft lost on that raid. They were typical Navy, PR opportunity. Apparently what they wanted to do was do it on October the 21st, 1940, which was the anniversary of Trafalgar. But there was a fire in one of the hangars on one of the aircraft, so they had to postpone it till November the 11th. So, a little bit of film here just to show you what goes on. This is an Admiralty training film from about 1943, showing you how to launch from the deck.
When the steam jet shows that the ship is into the wind, commander flying shows a green flag from his bridge. This is the executive signal for flying off, and the deck control officer proceeds with the operation. Chocks away is the first signal, and the aircraft must now be held on the brakes until the green flag is dropped, which signal is given for each individual aircraft. This green flag is only used for the takeoff. As soon as one aircraft is clear of the takeoff position, another is brought up into its place and the operation proceeds automatically. Pilots must be on the alert and respond immediately to all signals from the control officer and his assistants. In this way, and with good drill and cooperation, aircraft can take off at intervals of 10 to 12 seconds.
Look how close they are together. Oh.
As the aircraft take off, they either proceed independently or to a prearranged squadron forming up position, which is generally on the bow of the carrier.
Now they're using the full length of the deck to take off. There, just turn the carrier into wind, roll them down the deck. They are usually airborne by the time they get to the island. These are swordfish, they're very light, very light. Heavier aircraft needed a bit of assistance, so but that's, if you look at this one, this is the...
Let's look at the accelerator, which is a form of catapult, hydro-pneumatically operated.
That's a Lend-Lease aircraft.
This device enables aircraft to be got into the air with as much as 25 knots of beam wind, but less for port beam wind in the case of certain types of aircraft, this being due to its position near the port side of the deck. Aircraft can be launched about every 45 seconds. When all is ready, the pilot gives the OK, and the deck officer, by waving his green flag with a circular motion, gives him the signal to build up his revs. When the moment arrives, the flag is dropped and off she goes. So much for the accelerated takeoff of a lightweight machine.
So that's how you got it off. Now those catapults, they weren't called catapults, they were called accelerators, they were hydraulic. They weren't steam. So you've got your aircraft in the air. So now, recovery, you've got to get them back.
From now onwards, each pilot is under the orders of the control officer. All his signals must be obeyed. By making these unmistakable signals, the control officer can bring the pilot to the right height and speed over the after end of the deck, and it is obvious that a pilot who places himself completely in the hands of the deck officer can be sure of making a safe landing. Specially detailed ratings run out and disengage the hook. The aircraft taxis forward, and the barriers are raised in readiness for the next arrival. A little to your right, a little higher. Cut your engine. The pilot closes his throttle, and if the plane is being flown in the right attitude, it will make a good landing. It is essential that all these signals should be obeyed promptly. To make things easy for the hard-working control officer, it is most desirable that aircraft should make a straight approach, stepped up at the correct angle. Let's have a look at that in slow motion. Note the angle, plenty of engine, nose well up. Aircraft hanging on its propeller and sinking steadily towards the deck. The rate of sinking is controlled by the amount of throttle used. We'll keep this slow motion going so that you can see clearly how the hook functions. It catches the wire, the hydraulic resistance comes into play, and the aircraft is smoothly arrested. So far, we've only seen comparatively slow-moving aircraft landing, but with care and obedience to the batsman's signals, fast fighter craft like this martlet can be safely landed on a modern carrier.
So that's how they did it during World War II. And the poor old chap out there with waving his bats. But it was relatively, by today's standards, quite slow. Remember the torpedo run against the Bismarck by the Swordfish? They were only chugging along at about 80 miles an hour. So they were quite slow-moving aircraft. World War II came to an end, and of course things started to get a bit different, and we see the advent of the jet aircraft. This is a photograph of a chap called Eric Winkle Brown. Some of you may have heard of him. He is quite a famous test pilot. He landed this Sea Vampire on the deck of HMS Ocean in the Channel in December 1945. So only 6 months after World War II ends, we are trying jet aircraft at sea. And it was successful, and it was done. We have that aircraft in the museum as an exhibit. But jet engines meant we could have heavier, faster aircraft. There were some interesting designs. This was the first operational jet the Navy had, Supermarine Attacker. It's interesting that it's still got a tail wheel. Now, how that worked quite, I don't know, but I've not talked to any pilots. So eventually, jets got bigger and heavier, and this is the prototype of what became the Scimitar. And you notice we've gone to a tricycle undercarriage now, standard 3 wheels. So there were 3 inventions, all British, and they were all serving engineer officers that actually changed the design. So the carrier is just a straight deck at the moment. So with all these newer aircraft coming along, certain things need to be done. So the first thing that was invented was the steam catapult. And this is the trial ship for the steam catapult. And basically what you've got underneath the deck is you've got 2 pistons with a little hook sticking up through the deck, which is called the shuttle. And when it's ready to go, you get this high pressure steam which fires it off the deck. This is an old sea fire with its wing clip, so it just ended up in the drink. So the steam catapult was to get these heavier aircraft airborne. The other thing was the angled deck, because jet aircraft landing on needed more room. When a Swordfish landed on a carrier, it had stopped by the time it reached the island. So all this area up here was quite happy to have aircraft parked. But if you've got a jet aircraft coming along here is going to plough straight into the car park. So the angled deck was typically about 5 or 6 degrees, but if you look at some of the American designs, they've got a 12.5 degree angle on them. So the steam catapult, the angled deck, and then to make sure that the pilot could actually line up. The poor old batsman can't do it quick enough. By the time he says, cut your engine, he's down there because he's landing now, not at 50 miles an hour, he's landing at 90, 100, 120 knots. So the first thing that was this mirror deck landing site. And there's a lovely story here. It was invented by 2 guys in MOD, 2 naval engineering officers in an office with a secretary and in the 50s. And this secretary had a compact in her handbag. Ladies' compact, you open it up, you've got a mirror, and they said, can you give us your lipstick? So they drew a line across the middle of the lipstick, laid that on a deck, on a table, got a torch and shone the torch at the mirror. And they said, right, position yourself where you can see the torch lined up with the red line. If you do that, and you can actually do this at home, this is something you can try at home, my 9-year-old grandson loved doing this. You line it up. If you keep the torch lined up with the red line, your chin will come to rest about there on the table. Now, that was the initial one, and then they realised that by putting a glass mirror here, it soon got fogged up with salt spray and all the rest of it, and it morphed into what became known as the deck landing projector site. But those 3 inventions let us move forward into the jet age, and it done away with the batsman. So it was something positioned on the left-hand side of the angled deck.
No, what came first then? Because what you're describing there is exactly what commercial aircraft use now called the PAPI, Research and Approach Indicator, where you're flying in on lights.
On lights, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, did the PAPI come out of this?
Pass on that one.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly. I don't know. But the story, I mean, as strange as it sounds, that story about the powder compact is true. It's actually recorded. And it was just a system of lights. Eventually, they got rid of that, and it became somebody sitting there with projector, and they projected a series of lights at the pilot, which put him onto the right glide path. And we'll see that working in a moment or two. So by the 1960s, that was where we were. And then somebody said, well, actually, we're still using ex-World War II aircraft carriers now, all getting a bit long in the tooth, you know, starting to leak, starting to show signs of wear. Perhaps we need something a bit better. So 1960s, they came up with this. This was CVA-01. This was the design that was going to take the Navy from the 60s into the 70s and the 80s and beyond. However, it was cancelled by the government. Far too expensive. Can't possibly. Harold Wilson took that off. And we had a man called John Knott as well, who did not understand why the Navy were flying airplanes at all. So, okay. But that was where we were going to go. But no, they said you can carry on with what you've got. And so this is HMS Ark Royal, 1975. So more modifications, more refits, the addition of lumps and bumps all over it. And we started to fly really heavy aircraft. The Buccaneer, 30 tons of Buccaneer. 30 tons, designed to fly at 40 feet at 600 knots. You could stand on the flight deck and look down on it as it flew past. It had an amazing built-in system to provide lift on the wings. And eventually we were flying those ones parked at the back, the McDonnell Douglas Phantom. So what I've got here is a clip from, again, another training film, Ark Royal 1975, just to give you an idea of what it was like and the noise. And
the buck moves up to the bowcat, while behind, the base loading director marshals the next Phantom on. Bowcat, the JBD's jet blast deflectors come up and lock behind the Buccaneer. They're great big water-cooled plates held up by powerful hydraulic jacks. Above, the SAR gives the buck a last-second look over. The whole back is secured behind. An AEO checks the tail incidents and the Badger runs out. Up front, it's down parking chocks. The bridle's hooked up to the aircraft. Nose wheel in the air. Tension. All good. Thumbs up. Clear from underneath. Straighten the nose wheel. Thumbs up to the FDO. The lamp box lights. Flyco lights. Green. Go. And another one ready behind it. Aft the waistcat. The Phantom's on. Hold back secured. Hook up the bridle. Tension. Nylon bridle arrestor stops tight. Cruise clear, afterburners, everything straining, pilot happy, go! Bridle comes back for the next launch. Already another Phantom lining up.
so you notice there that it's very similar to World War II. The slight difference is that the aircraft are a lot heavier, a lot faster. Those Phantoms had afterburners on. If you got in the way of that, you're toast, literally. And it was all very, very, very well choreographed. We often get asked the question, is it dangerous? Yes, of course it is. But then I always say to people, yeah, okay, imagine a West End musical and you've got 100 odd people on stage all doing a big dance routine. Everybody's got to know where everybody else is. So it's training and choreography. But the forces at play here, 30-ton aircraft, 0 to 120 mile an hour in 75 metres, 75 yards. So it's a big kick up the backside. So having got them off, of course, you've got to get on.
Recovery stations, recovery stations.
Fire suit men, tractors, handlers, everyone behind the wingtip safety lines.
Final 1.5 miles.
The NSO talks him down a 4-degree
This is
glide
the
path.
landing site officer, replaced the mirror.
Roger. On the glide path, in the groove. The 4 wires correctly set, bowstrings raised, target wire 3. The hookmen run out, brakes off, the tension pulls the aircraft back, the front man signals forward to the wires director, taxi. The aft man indicates wires reset. The wire is reset, bowspring raised 3 inches. Phantom, hook, wheels and flaps down. Second wire. Grandstand view at the DLPS. Back comes the wire scratching over the deck. The FDEO, Flight Deck Engineering Officer, checks it for physical damage. Okay. Each wire should be good for 30 recoveries anyway. Buccaneer. Hookmen out. Go astern. Wire release. Up hook, up flaps, wings fold. Wires reset and taxi followed to park in Fly 1.
That's it. So that's a recovery. Now it's an American admiral once said it's the greatest show on earth. Watching that, and you know, I used to be stood up on the island. I've got reels of 8mm film of this at home, and you could stand on the island and watch it, provided you had your sleeves rolled down and you had ear defenders on. When the Phantoms were taking off on the waistcat, the noise was so you could actually feel it squeezing your chest, and I was, you know, 40, 50 feet away. It was quite a noise. So that was where we were in the mid-1970s. But back in 1963, this happened. This is a Hawker P1127. And we have one of these in the museum, and I always tell people that I made a model of this, an Airfix kit of this, when I was 13 years of age. And I'm sure I'm probably not the only one. It's still flying today, as the Americans are flying it, as the AV-8A. They're using them down off Yemen against the Houthis. It looks a little different to that, but it did change the way in which our aircraft carriers started to operate. That was 63. We didn't actually get them until much later. So when the Ark Royal went in 79, they said, well, you can't have any more carriers. Sorry, there's no more money. But you can have some cruisers. So we said through-deck cruisers, but actually they were aircraft carriers. And we had Harriers and helicopters. And the Harriers were the saviour of Fleet Air Arm aviation, fixed-wing aviation. There was a strong move in the late 70s, early 80s to get rid of fixed-wing aviation. As it happened, we got the Harriers, we had the Falklands War, and the rest is history. So that changed things. Now we have invention number 4 here, again by an engineering officer, this ski ramp. Now when you lift a Harrier off the deck, a straight vertical lift, you are burning fuel at a phenomenal rate. And you're really piling on the revs. And he did all the maths, and he said, if you take a short takeoff run and then throw the aircraft into the sky like that, you can cut down on the fuel, which means you can carry a bigger payload. And the side effect of that was it had a brilliant side effect on the psychological effect on the pilot. Because if you imagine a pilot sitting in the cockpit and in front of you is miles and miles of wet, soggy ocean, you're going to be fired off in that in a very short space, and hopefully you're going to go up. Hopefully. This, you're actually thrown upwards looking. So mentally, it did have quite an effect on pilots. Lots of people copied this idea. In the top little picture is the Russian aircraft carrier Kiev, which is no longer around, but they obviously thought it was a good idea. So another little clip of video. Again, I found all this on the internet, which just shows you. This is off Invincible. We've done away with catapults, we've done away with the rest of the wires. So it's a short takeoff and then up into the air. This is the landing.
Carriers approaching to recover onto Invincible transit from 200 knots of wing-borne speed to a vertical hover in 30 seconds. The approach is not direct to the flight deck, but to a hover point slightly to port. The pilot then slides the plane over the flight deck and makes a vertical landing. This procedure reduces the workload on the pilot and means the Harrier can land in foul weather that will force a conventional jet to divert or ditch.
And the Harriers just line up, move forward a bit, next one comes in behind it, one after the other, boom, 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 fill up the parking lot. There was a lot of controversy over the Navy having Harriers because for years the Fleet Air Arm had always had twin-engine aircraft, but that's only got a single engine. So that's where we were. Then Ark Royal went and we had a hiatus of 10 or so years, and then the Navy decided, well, actually, we'll start going with modern. This is the artist's impression of the Queen Elizabeth when it was built. Looks slightly different to that now, but the ski jump is there. The other configuration that was talked about was this, a bit similar to American carriers where you've got the two islands and you've got catapults and arrestor gear. I'm reliably informed that both ships, they're still working, Prince of Wales is in Singapore at the moment, can be converted quite simply. But of course it wouldn't be a steam catapult, it would be an electromagnetic catapult because there's no steam on these ships. These are powered by electric motors and diesel generators. So that is not the Queen Elizabeth, but that's the sort of view you'd get from, this is an F-35C because it's got a hook. Size does matter. That's the Queen Elizabeth in build. Now, if you look very carefully, in the bottom of the dock, you'll see two little chaps there and two little chaps up there. 65,000 tonnes, biggest ships the Navy's ever had. They've got 4.5 acres of flight deck. 4.5 acres. And they only need 1,600 people to operate. That's including the air group. Normal steaming without aircraft is about 700. Massive, massive automation. To give you an idea, the magazines that for the aircraft weapons, which are stored low in the ship, when the ship was being designed, the designers went to Amazon. And they went to Amazon and they said, how do you move your stuff around a warehouse? And they said, well, we just type in the barcode or whatever, scan the barcode, and it does it. So now they've got a system similar to that on there. So if matey on the flight deck says, well, we want a couple of sidewinders, a couple of 500-pound bombs, right, presses a button, deep down in the ship, a big arm goes up along there, pulls that one off a rack, pulls that one off a rack. The ship was built slightly differently in that it doesn't got a keel. It's built in sections. The bow section of these ships was actually built in Appledore in Devon. And they were all floated up to Rosyth and all bolted, all well together. Now I've got a final little clip of film here which shows you a F-35 operating during Queen Elizabeth sea trials. I'll turn it down a bit because it's quite noisy. The F-35 is the noisiest aircraft in God's creation. It's deafening. It's amazing noise. There's only 2 aircraft in play here, but you can see the size of the flight deck. The control of this aircraft is fingertip. It's when you look at a Harrier landing where the pilot's doing this, you look at this, it's a drone with a pilot in it. Hey? Unstable aircraft, yeah. Stable, yeah. Sitting there without yeah, there's an auxiliary behind with, you know, half a ton of ever-ready batteries on them, you know.
Doesn't have any antennas that stick up. All of the antennas are
Flush. Well, you would know
and
that.
you think about the fact that you've got a flush mounted antenna that's still got to be like a monopole.
Yeah. Well, there you go. The F-35 is apparently an amazing aircraft, but the first thing the pilot has to do is log on with the password. So if you ain't got the right password, you ain't going anywhere.
And then you get Windows update. Oh, no.
Yeah, Control Alt Delete.
3
Yeah.
hours update.
It's at where they're based. They're based at Marham in Norfolk, and it's like an airfield within an airfield. It's very tight security. They come to Yeovilton every so often. They are not allowed to land. They are not allowed. They can fly over. The reason they're not allowed to land is that they may not get off again, in case they want to go. And Yeovilton is like Brize Norton. You could drive a London bus in there and not be noticed. When you drive through the base at Yeovilton, you've got all this lovely razor wire. If you go around the back about 3 miles out into the country, you've got what they had at Brize Norton, a 6-foot wooden fence. So the reason is that the amount of security around these is because of all the secret kit. It's completely networked. So it acts like a hub, a networked hub. The electronics in it are, I've tried to find out about it and don't. Just to, but I'm sure somebody, no. Yeah, just a word on the radio side. When you work on a carrier, I worked on 2 of them. It's slightly different from working on a little frigate because everything is big. Everybody on the carrier has got something to do with the air group. Doesn't matter whether you're a stoker or a cook or whatever. Something in your daily work routine will be involving the flight deck. For example, when we saw those Phantoms and Buccaneers taking off, those guys in black and white surcoats weren't Fleet Air Arm. They were marine engineers. It's steam. They understand steam. So they get drafted, their young lads got drafted to a carrier thinking they're going to work in a big 1940s engine room. No, you're on the flight deck moving aeroplanes around. And from a radio point of view, when you go in on there, you think about UHF comms. Well, we had a huge, great room, absolutely ram-jam full with UHF transceivers. Far more than, we had about 30 or 40 of them. Just to, and these were big rack-mounted jobs then in the 70s. They weren't little things like that. So everything you do is somebody. The chefs have to provide food 24 hours a day for the aircrew because they eat at odd times. Anyway, gents, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If anybody's got any questions,
No, over here, usually when they're training pilots to take off from aircraft carriers back in the day when they were catapulted or things like that, did they just have to train on the ship? Or was there dummy decks?
Dummy decks.
dummy deck, we had a dummy deck at Yeovilton. Didn't have a catapult. Did they have one at Cold Drive? Yeah.
It's exactly the same size as the aircraft carrier.
Yeah, they had a dummy deck.
just wondered-
They had, I think at Yeovilton, it's not there now, but they had a rescue gear as well.
Yeah,
And everything. It was all
just that,
just this white line.
I
Over
know,
that, you're in the
yeah.
drink.
Yeah, yeah.
at Patuxent River, they have a, if you like, a dummy aircraft platform to send off the F-16s and the F-18s in the day.
What has improved in leaps and bounds is flight simulation. They do a lot. I'll give you an example. Training a Wildcat helicopter pilot now, the first time he gets in a Wildcat is a year after he started his training. He spent a year in a simulator. And the simulation is real. Some things they can't simulate very well. They can't actually simulate vertical motion in a helicopter very well because you need a flight sim about 1,000 feet tall. But they can do that. Fixed wing, of course, yeah. They'll do a lot of simulation. But yeah.
Most of the aircraft that I've seen, they seem to be photographed from the back, and the flight deck always seems to go to the left. Is there a reason for that?
Well, the usual question is why is the flight deck island on the right hand side? There is no definitive answer. The Japanese have one on the other side.
Oh, right.
It's because
On the left,
I think it's probably something as simple as the fact that the majority of people in the world are right-handed. So it's natural for somebody to steer to the left, to go around in the circuit. The reason the angle was put in there to go to the left was the fact that we needed more landing area.
Yeah.
That's what it was about. But now, of course, we don't need that. It's a straight deck. We've gone back to the straight deck.
The logistics of keeping all the things fueled. I mean, you've got the aircraft that require one sort of fuel.
Yeah.
You've got the ship that requires another.
No, they're the same there.
And so on and so forth. I mean,
No, they're the
it must
same there.
be.
They carry, well, I mean, aircraft fuel is diesel, but a slightly more refined version.
No,
It
no,
depends
no,
on the...
paraffin.
Paraffin, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And so
Okay.
the turbines on the...
Destroyers has got the same engines on it as...
But I mean, the Queen Elizabeth is diesel electric.
Running on flight.
The Queen Elizabeth is propelled by electricity.
Yeah, but
It's a-
the fuel's the same as the aircraft.
Yeah,
The fuel's the same as the aircraft, so they only have one source of fuel.
fuel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but you say it's diesel. I remember when I was East Anglia, I went to a couple of US air bases, and I was there in tellies, and the bloke said, "Can you do this, that, and the other? Ain't got any money, Cup, but do you want some fuel?" So
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah." I've got like a, I don't know, an Austin 7. When I came home, I couldn't switch the bugger off.
They go, you have
It was
gas,
just
that's
chucking
right.
away.
Mike White was the fastest TV repairman in the West.
We had that film of Ark Royal. We had Wessex on there. And we had a fuel called Avpin.
Oh, cool. A monofuel.
And that Avpin would ignite itself.
It's a monofuel. You can't...
And they put those in the cartridges to start the helicopters. Yeah, we had all sorts of different fuels. You know.
They give you a glove to back that out, don't they?
no smoking throughout the ship really did mean no smoking.
At the time, aviation spirit was up.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The Ark Royal, the one that you see that there was a video of, was a very interesting comparison, because down in the engine room you had boilers. We had 4 boilers, 4 gear rooms, and we were burning furnace fuel oil. Now, furnace fuel oil was sticky, black, horrible. Yeah, we were burning FFO, but you had 1970s aircraft, so there was like a 30-year technology gap between the flight deck and the engine room. I mean, down in the engine room, it was you took your life in your hands going down there. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. I hope you found that really interesting. Good. Go on,